Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to have a little chat with you guys because, as you may or may not know, depending on whether or not you watch my videos, I am always open to any sort of criticism, comments, and even insults you guys put in the comments section. So you guys can be really mean sometimes, but most of the time I try to dig a little deeper, trying to find an actual argument so we can have a conversation. You know, that's pretty much the reason why I started this channel, so I can find more people that enjoy music as much as I do, and we can exchange opinions and ideas. However, sometimes I stumble upon comments that literally make me worry for that person's future due to the level of stupidity and ignorance that emanates from the comment. Last week, for example, I uploaded a video to my channel called The Beatles versus Elvis Presley, part of my Versus series. If you guys want to check that out, it's on my channel. And you know, because it's the Beatles and Elvis Presley, two of the most respected and loved artists of all time, there was a lot of people saying that the Beatles are better. There's a lot of people saying that Elvis Presley is better. Me personally, I think that my Beatle bias kind of cut the best out of me, and I ended up giving the win to the Beatles. I do believe that when it comes to discography, the Beatles are the greatest band of all time, and obviously discography for me is the most important thing an artist should have. And a lot of you guys agreed, a lot of you guys disagreed. That's the whole point of a conversation, you know, everybody gets their own point of view out there, and you can agree, you can disagree, it's a free space, you guys can say whatever you want. However, there was this specific comment made by an individual that I don't know if he gets all the Beatles information from the YouTube feed or something like that, but he literally stated that the only thing the Beatles ever did was mediocre pop music, or pop music with no depth. And anyone that knows even surface level Beatles songs knows that this is a lie. However, he seemed pretty convinced because I went on to make a whole paragraph explaining the massive influence and impact the Beatles had in the music industry, and still I got no reply, which leads me to think that the guy just didn't really bother to check out the comment, or if he was just too stuck in his own idea that the Beatles never did anything other than pop music and didn't want to argue about it. I decided to do a little research, and in fact there's a lot of people in places like Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, pretty much the gutter of the internet, saying that the Beatles never did anything else than just mediocre pop songwriting. And I can understand where that point of view comes from. I can understand that if you only listen to the songs that are most popular on YouTube, like Hey Jude, Let It Be, I Wanna Hold Your Hand, Twist and Shout, you can maybe think of the Beatles as a boy band from the 60s. I can perfectly see that picture. However, your ignorance shouldn't be enough for you to go out there and put your opinions on the internet without an open mind, without being like open to people changing the way you think. And for that reason is that I decided to make this video and kind of give my opinion, or the way I see the Beatles and their impact in the 60s. I'm gonna go through every single stage of the Beatles discography and give my own little perspective on how much they influenced music back in the day. Now, as I said just a minute ago, I can kind of understand the narrative of the Beatles only doing pop music, especially if you only focus on the Beatlemania years, because indeed albums like Please Please Me, Beatles for Sale, A Hard Day's Night are albums that mostly focus on rock and roll music that was really popular at the time. However, something that people, or personally I believe they don't understand, is that the Beatles are greatly responsible for making pop music what it was even in the 60s. Rock and roll music was not the same prior to the Beatles. For instance, if you want to see an example of what rock and roll music was, you should definitely go see people like Elvis, for example. If you compare his version of rock and roll music even deep in the 60s, it's way different than that of the Beatles. And if you see other bands that were doing the same type of music at the time, it sounds way more raw, it wasn't as melodic, and it wasn't as fast-paced as the Beatles version of rock music, showcased in songs like I Saw Her Standing There, She Loves You, etc. These songs were heavily reliant on the melody, not that much the performance, which was the key of any rock and roll song prior to the 60s. It was pretty much the energy that you can emanate from your voice when you're performing the track. That was the most important thing, which is the reason why so many rock compositions in the 50s were so similar to each other, because it was more about how you perform the track, you know, giving it your own twist. Instead, the Beatles focused more on songwriting, creating catchy melodies, creating pretty tunes, and mixing that with the energetic, fast-paced nature of a rock and roll song. That is the reason why albums like Please Please Me and With the Beatles, or Meet the Beatles if you want to go for the US version, which is the most popular one, are so important for rock culture, because they introduced a version of rock and roll that was way more acceptable for radio and for live performances as well. Another thing that was unique to the Beatles was putting their own original material as the singles. That was not really that seen at the time. Usually usually what you would find is people putting the most well-known song covered by a lot of artists already, or written by a songwriter that was really popular at the time as a single, and that way you can promote the original material you have in the rest of the album or compilation or, you know, B-side. But even though this was massive and it came with a lot of other things like fashion trends, for example, lingo being copied, people trying to speak like someone from the UK, this is the least impressive contribution the band ever did to music, because after that you find yourself in 1965 with albums like Help and Rubber Soul, which completely changed the way artists did albums or approached the creation of an album. Because even though a lot of people like to credit the modern album to Frank Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning, the truth is that the Beatles created the first true concept album. And by concept, I must clarify that I don't mean lyrical concept. I don't mean something like The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, for example, or maybe Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band or Pet Sounds. I'm talking about an album that has no filler, an album in which every single song has extreme care and dedication behind it, and every song was made to be a 5-star composition by the band. That is the true definition of the modern album. But it doesn't really stop there, because you had John Lennon and Paul McCartney writing songs like Yesterday and You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, extremely personal and vulnerable, and no other rock and roll artist was making those type of songs. They were obviously, you know, there were love songs prior to the Beatles. Obviously the Rolling Stones were doing something similar with all the records of blues rock music that they were releasing at the time, but none of them were as personal and as vulnerable and as minimalistic as the one the Beatles were doing at the time in, once again, albums like Rubber Soul, with Girl, tracks like Norwegian Wood, and Yesterday and You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, deeply influenced by Bob Dylan, by the way. But once again, we're only scratching the surface, because once you get to 1966 and 1967, you have the biggest contribution to psychedelic music ever made with the release of Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Revolver introduced songwriting like never before seen, with records like I'm Only Sleeping, Eleanor Rigby, which included elements of classical music into pop songwriting. You also have the wonderful Tomorrow Never Knows, Dr. Robert adding this dreamy psychedelic vibe to the music and still sounding incredibly radio friendly, which is a massive feat. You have reversed guitars, a bunch of acoustic guitars being played at once to make it sound like a totally different instrument, voice mods that make their pitch sound higher, which makes this, you know, this whole thing sound like an alien coming up to you in a dream when you took too many drugs the night before. It was an amazing achievement, and it's even greater when you look at Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, for a lot of people the greatest achievement in music history, not only because of the innovations made in terms of songwriting, instrumental palettes, and overall performance as well, but also because of how well recorded this entire thing was. The production in this album is excellent, never before seen with such a level of detail. When you compare Sgt. Pepper's with any other album from 1967, it's even hard to believe that it was released back then. But it doesn't really stop there, because they went on to release songs like All You Need Is Love, Strawberry Fields Forever, which is one of the greatest, most complex songs of all time. You have Penny Lane, Hello Goodbye, Your Mother Should Know, The Fool on the Hill. That were playing around with so many different styles of songwriting that it was hard to put the Beatles in any specific genre, because it seemed like they covered a vast amount of different genres and they kind of mixed it together to create a unique thing, and that unique thing was the Beatles' discography. But they didn't really stop there. They continued to release more and more complex, diverse, unique songwriting styles with the next album, the greatest album of all time in my opinion, the White Album, or their self-titled 1968 record. This album is 30 tracks long, which was already unique at the time and made a lot of people feel free to do the same thing, creating albums that were not limited to only 10 or 14 tracks, being able to flesh out a certain instrumental palette or try a lot of different ideas in just one long record. The amount of genres this album covers is insane. Go ahead and look it up and see all the different styles of music the Beatles used to create this record. And once again, it worked, because this is one of the greatest albums of all time. But I think the major thing to come out of this album is songs like Helter Skelter and Your Blues, promoting a more heavy and aggressive type of rock music that eventually branched into genres like dark metal, death metal, black metal, and all these different other styles of rock music that rely heavily on harder and heavier sounds. And while Abbey Road doesn't take that many risks when it comes to the instrumental palette, it does take a lot of different approaches to songwriting in the form of tracks like Come Together and I Want You She's So Heavy by John Lennon, and the Abbey Road medley and songs like Oh Darling by Paul McCartney. By the way, putting a medley in your album was not really seen that often at the time. It is obviously way more profitable to include the tracks individually, so if they become popular, you can make a single out of these songs and make more money out of them. Instead, Paul McCartney decided to make like a whole mash of a lot of different songs that John and Paul both discarded and make one of the greatest musical pieces in the Beatles discography with the Abbey Road medley. So you could consider that to be also influential or at least unique. And then of course Let It Be may not be the most groundbreaking piece of music. Actually, I would say that it's a pretty simple album, but that's literally the point. It was an album that was supposed to bring him back to the roots, so you shouldn't really be expecting that much groundbreakingness to come out of that album. So if after everything I've said so far, if I took the time to explain almost every single major contributions the Beatles did for the music industry, you still believe that the Beatles are only a pop band or only did pop music, I think it's better to just agree to disagree, because there's no way in hell you're gonna convince me that the Beatles are a mediocre pop band when they were literally one of the most diverse and important musical acts of all time, and they did all this while creating some of the greatest albums ever. And it's really hard for me to believe that anyone who listens to these albums believes, oh yeah, this is just mediocre pop music. So that's pretty much the reason why I decided to give this really detailed explanation on most of the Beatles' contributions. Obviously, there's a lot of things, especially when it comes to recording techniques, that I didn't really explain because I don't really know a lot about it myself, so I'm just gonna leave that for someone else that actually knows what they're talking about. Actually, if you guys know something about that, definitely leave a comment down below, because I'm really interested, or I'm really curious to know what type of contributions the Beatles did in the recording studio as well, because I know there are many, I just don't know what they are. And also, you guys have to remember that this is only my personal opinion, so if you have your own, and I'm pretty sure you do, you can go ahead and leave it down below in the comments, and I'll make sure to check it out and give you my opinion on your opinion. That is going to be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. Also, if you have any requests, if you want me to check out a song, album, or artist, go ahead and leave it down below as well, and I'll make sure to check it out as soon as I can and fulfill your request as soon as possible. With that being said, once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.